Hit start recording, so hopefully it'll start recording here, and it should
hold this.
Oh, there we go. All right, so here we are. We're recording. So this is. I was initially thinking we were going to do a number of different types of lessons, or do a whole bunch of lessons in one. But given the amount of time that we have to spend on this, I want to just focus with you guys on how to remove a tire off a bike and how to replace the tube in the bike. So basically to kind of self-rescue yourselves if you have a flat tire so you're not walking out, which I know that Lacey already stated that that might be her choice, but I'm hoping to promote maybe a little bit of bike maintenance and be able to kind of rescue yourselves and get you guys out of the bush instead of hiking. So that's kind of the premise with this lesson. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to be pretty important for you guys to have a little bit of knowledge, whether you guys are able to achieve it solo or not, because it's not always the easiest thing to do is to change a tire tube. But if you guys have the knowledge and you have the tools, I know you guys ride together, so I think between the three of you, I think you can pull all your powers together and be able to get this tire change done. So have any of you ever had a flat tire on a bike before? Everyone has. Perfect. Yep. So have you ever taken a tire off a bicycle before?
By myself? No.
Perfect. I assume that you guys are probably going to end up dealing with this at some point. So I'm going to make sure that Lacey is fully equipped with all the tools that she needs. And I'm kind of expecting that you guys might do the same for yourselves as well. Maybe just carry a couple of tools, the necessary tools that you guys need.
I'm going to write them down.
You will, and I'm going to go through those in just a second. So, yeah, really, for me, having the knowledge and the tools and everything to get myself out of the bush with the proper tools is going to be pretty important. I don't think anybody or most people aren't really prepared to spend a night in the bush because of a flat tire. It's something super easy to fix to get yourselves back on the trail and continuing on. So to give you a little summary of what we're going to cover today is I've got a little 6-minute video that I already did in the basement. So it's going to consist of 4 minutes removing the front tire and the rear tire off the bike. And then that video is going to pause. I'll pause that. And then I will do a live demo of doing a tire tube change. And then I will continue to replay the rest of the video on just how to reassemble the tires back onto the bike. And just kind of the easiest ways for you guys to deal with that when you're out in the bush. After that, we'll kind of have some open discussion throughout. If you guys have any questions, like I said before, don't hesitate to stop me and we can discuss if there's something that comes up in your mind. And then at the very end of it, we're going to do, have you guys ever played a Kahoot quiz? I know Lacey has, and that super excites her. So Shannon, if you've never played a Kahoot, perfect. No. It is just a little.
It sounds fun though.
It is an online 8-question quiz that I generated, and you can just access it through your phone. And we play along like that. So it's very self-explanatory, and that's just going to basically give me an evaluation of what you guys have learned throughout this lesson. So without further ado, let's kind of get started. So the first thing that I have on my agenda is just to kind of talk about the tools that you guys should be packing all the time. And there's really 3 to 4 main tools that you guys should always have with you. So the first one, if anybody has that in their packs already, I feel like Erin probably does because she's a bit of a keener with that stuff.
You know it.
We absolutely need our bicycle pump. And this is kind of a nice little bike pump that you can mount on your bike or just put in your backpack, because we are definitely not going to carry this guy around with us while we're paddling around. We also need, for a tire change, we need a set of tire levers. And those tire levers are what is just going to assist us in removing the tire off of the wheel. So they usually come in sets of 2. We obviously need, if we have a flat tire, we need a new tube that we can replace unless you have a patch kit. But for this lesson today, we're just going to talk about a tube replacement. And the last thing that is going to be handy to have is just a little multi-tool. And a multi-tool is just a bunch of different sizes of Allen keys that sometimes we have to use to remove our tires off our bikes. So those are the kind of the basic tools that you guys need for the job. Any questions with the tools themselves? I will explain in the live demo. I'm going to explain exactly what to do and how to use those tools properly to get you guys going on the trails. But first, we're going to play kind of the first section of the video. And it is absolutely fantastic. I worked really hard at this. So with any luck, you guys are seeing kind of what I'm seeing. It's just basically me with my bicycle.
Yeah.
See that?
Yep.
Fantastic. If anybody has any questions, just make sure you stop me and I can pause it and you guys can have some input. But I'll just let it play out for the first 4 minutes here.
Okay, so the first step to make it as easy as possible for you while you're on the side of the trail dealing with a flat tire is to actually flip the bike over. What I like to do is I'll go up to my bike, I'll make sure that the seat is up all the way if we have a dropper seat post, and then I'll take the bike and I'll just put it on its seat and handlebars.
Oh,
Flip the bike over.
After we have the bike flipped upside down, now we can focus on removing the front tire. Afterwards, we will talk about removing the rear tire and how to easily do that. So what you're going to need to do, depending on what type of axle you have, is you may need a multi-tool. Now our multi-tool just has multiple different sizes of Allen keys, and some front axles require an Allen key for removal. So what I'll do is I'll use the 6mm Allen key, and I will remove the axle, taking it out of the fork, and now gives me the opportunity to be able to remove the wheel off of the fork. Being that we're out on the trail, what I like to do is I like to take the front axle and I like to just put it back inside the fork, just so we don't lose it. Now, the most important thing to remember, and you guys should write this down, is whenever you have a wheel off of the bike, to never press a brake lever. Never accidentally hit it with your foot or never squeeze it with your hands, because what that does is that squeezes our brake pads together, which will not allow us to be able to reinstall the wheel. So it's going to create a whole bunch more problems than you really need to deal with while you're trying to help yourself get back on the trail riding your bike.
Very important tip. Don't squeeze that brake lever when that wheel is.
Did not know that.
So to remove the rear tire off the bike, again, we're out on the side of the trail, so we want to make it as easy as possible. Easiest way to do this is to put our bike down into the hardest gear. So what I'll do is I'll go down to my shifter and I will press my shifter a bunch of times to allow that derailleur to shift down into the hardest gear possible. And then when I pedal it, it's going to move down the cassette into a harder gear.
It just allows us to easily take that tire off without too much chain tension.
Now that it's down into a harder gear, we're able to, depending on what type of derailleur we're dealing with, but on this particular derailleur, it has a lock. So we can take our derailleur, push it ahead, push the lock in, and let that go, and that is going to keep the chain slack. Now that we have the derailleur in the hardest gear and the chain as slack as possible, now we can loosen our axle for our rear. I will spin that rear axle out, slide the rear axle out of the rear suspension, and now I can simply pull that rear tire out and make sure that I clear the chain as I remove it. Now again, very important, do not press the brake lever. Otherwise it will collapse the pads and you won't be able to get the tire back in easily.
So I'll pause it there so we can get back to our live feed here. So does anybody have any questions just on removing the tires themselves? So it's fairly basic. Again, with that front tire, all we need to do is remove that axle, depending on if we require that multi-tool to be able to thread that axle out. Big thing is if you remove parts off your bike, don't just lay them down in the dirt, just because it's going to create probably more issues when you reinstall them in the bike. So when you have that front tire out or that front axle out, take your tire off. Again, don't squeeze those brake pads because it does collapse those pads together. You're not going to be able to get that wheel back into place without having to pry those brake pads apart. Super important. And then that back tire is really, it's kind of the same thing, is when we remove that rear axle, we just have that chain tension and the cassette, so all of our gears that we have to contend with. So it kind of gets caught and tangled when you're usually taking the back tire out. So it just makes it a little bit easier if you shift it down into a harder gear or the hardest gear, and then it just loosens that chain tension off just a little bit.
I have a question, Ryan.
Yeah. Go ahead, Aaron.
Hello, are you there?
Yeah.
Hey, if you're shifting, do you always, if you're shifting and the bike's upside down, you don't always have to pedal when you're shifting, like the pedals don't have to move, like you can shift it first before you pedal?
Yeah, you can shift it first as long as you pedal,
Okay.
because that is what's going to allow that chain to drop down into the harder gear. Yep.
Right. For some reason I thought you always had to pedal as you're shifting. I just read about it. I don't know.
Me too.
If you're riding, definitely. But I mean, you can do it at the same time. You can pedal and then hit the shifter, but it's not, yeah,
It
it's not,
doesn't do any damage or anything?
no damage whatsoever. No, not when it's, no.
Okay.
Cool. So that brings us to our live demo on how we are going to actually remove this tire. So there's a couple of key, and hopefully I can get this camera angle at a decent spot so you guys can see this. So really what we have here is I've just got a spare wheel that I had kicking around, and I have a tire on it, and it's flat. So we're pretty much stranded. The good thing is we know how to take our tire off either the front or the rear of the bike, and this happens to be a front tire. So I'm going to just kind of go through the process in the easiest steps to try and help you guys remember exactly how to remove that tire and get the tube replaced so we can get going back on the trail. So these tire levers, these plastic levers, you can see that there is on this end, there's a little hooked end, and on the opposite end, there's a little notch. It's kind of actually hard to see that notch, but you can see that notch right there. Well, I kind of like these tire levers because that notch can actually help us by hooking into the spokes and hold the tire lever into place. So being that we don't have any air, well, what I'm going to do is hopefully you guys are efficient at airing your own tires up. But if you're not, these are some good tips. So this guy here, what we put air into is called our valve stem. So that valve stem, and this is most typical style of valve stem. So this is the only one that I'm going to focus on probably the bikes that you guys are riding. So in order to let air in or out of that valve stem, we need to take this little end piece and we can screw it. We can unscrew that end piece. So hopefully you can see that there's a little difference in how that valve stem was seated. When it's tight and you don't want any air to come out, you can see that there's a slight difference there. It's threaded all the way in and seated. If you push on it, you can't put air in and you can't let air out. So what I like to do is I like to unthread the valve stem, just give it a little push, ensure that there's no more trapped air in the tube, because there's a possibility that it could be a slow leak and maybe not all of the air has escaped out of that tube yet. So it's really important to get all that air out. The next step is we need to do what's called breaking the bead. So when you hear anybody talking about breaking the bead of the tire of the tire is the side of the tire that seals on the rim itself. So it's the part that seals the tire to the wheel. And that is basically what is keeping all the air in if you're tubeless, if you don't have tubes. And that is just what is seating that tire against or sealing it against the wheel. So to break that bead, if it's not like this and nice and loose, you have to physically grab it with your hands and pull that tire over and rotate it to be able to get a small gap in between the bead of the tire and the wheel. So break that bead. And you only need to do it on one side of the tire. You don't need to take the tire right off to do a tube change. Once that bead is broken, now we can use our tire levers. So that hooked edge of that tire lever is going to, if we fold that tire out slightly, and hopefully you guys can see this well enough, you're going to pull that tire over and slip the hooked edge underneath the bead of the wheel or of that tire. And you can see how it's gripping on the bead of the tire and it's starting to pull it over. Well, that's exactly what you want. And you can see the other side of the lever, that little hooked edge. Well, once you pull that bead over, that hooked edge just can hook onto the spoke itself. And that will keep it in place. So that's why I like to use these style of tire levers. It just makes it easier. So you can pull that bead over and get that tire lever locked. And then you can go to the next closest spoke. You can slide the hooked edge in underneath the bead of the tire and pull it over. And then you just keep alternating. Slide it in and pull it over.
For every single spoke?
You don't have to do it for every single spoke, but as soon as that tire is loose enough, because it's tight when it comes over the side of the wheel.
Oh.
So as soon as you get enough of that tire around the outside of the wheel, then you can usually pull the tire lever around.
Okay, I jumped the gun there. I was sorry about that.
No, and that's okay. So once you have that tire pulled away from that wheel, now it gives you access to the tire tube itself. So the tire tube, back to our valve stem, there's a little nut that screws on the bottom of the valve stem. If we take that nut off the valve stem, try and hold it to the camera so you guys can see it. There's that little threaded nut that screws over the valve stem. Once you have that unthreaded, now we can pull our tube from the inside, pull the valve stem through the wheel. And now that's going to enable us to just pull the tube right out of that wheel assembly. We're halfway there. You guys have a brand new tube in your packs. as of very soon, you can take your tube out of the packs. And all of our tubes come with a little black cap that threads on the end of the valve stem. And they also come with that nut as well.
Right.
So you can remove both of those. A very important step, so you can see this is a good kind of close-up of that valve stem. That's in the seated position. And in order to put air in that tube, we need to be able to unscrew that valve and make the end of that valve loose.
Mm.
So now that's when we can add air or remove air from that tube. Any questions so far on taking the tube out?
Nope.
And now it does take a little bit of practice to get efficient at it. So you guys, that's going to be your homework tonight or tomorrow. And you guys are going to, I definitely want to see some efficient tire tube changes over the next short while here.
Done. Okay.
Excellent. And I've got all sorts of wheels that you guys can practice on. So once we have this tube out of the box and ready to go, the easiest thing that we can do is add a little bit of air to it with our pump. And I'm just going to use my floor pump just because of ease. I'm going to attach my floor pump on the valve stem. And I'm just going to put a little bit of air into that tube. Just enough so it kind of takes shape.
Theo.
So you can see it's not flat anymore. It's got a little bit of shape to it. And I will close that valve stem so it doesn't release any air. And then I can take it over to my bike tire. So the important thing to do is when we're reinstalling that tube is we need to be able to find that hole where that valve stem went through, because we need to initially feed that valve stem back through from the inside to the outside of that wheel. So to do that, we can just bend the tire out of the way a little bit. Well, actually, one of two ways we can do it. We can just kind of insert the tube into the tire itself, and we can get that valve stem pushed through inside of the wheel so you can see it's back in place. The next thing we need to do is we can just loosely screw on that valve stem nut just so that tube doesn't get pushed back up into the tire. Now that that's in place, we can take the tube and we can feed it into the tire all the way around. Once the tube is in the tire, now we can start pulling that tire and using both of our hands, and we can kind of work our way around. And we're just folding that tire bead around so it locks on the inside of that wheel. Now there's going to get to a point where it gets a little bit more difficult. So usually kind of the last short little bit on the tire, it usually gets really tight. So quite often we have to grab a tire lever and kind of spoon it back over so it sits properly on the tire. And I'll just get it to that point. Sometimes you need to squeeze the bottom together a little bit so you can get the tire up into what's called the dish of the wheel. So up in the recess of the wheel. And that usually gives you a little bit more room on the opposite side to pull the tire over. So I have it to the point where I can use my tire lever. And again, we're going to use the hook, but we're going to hook it on the inside of the rim and we will just fold it up this time. And we will go to the next little spot, and we will pull it up and over the wheel. And again. Up and over the wheel until all of the bead all the way around is seated. At that point, we can snug that little nut up, open our valve stem, and now we're ready to reinflate the wheel with our pump. So I will just use my floor pump again. And I will give it a few. Now, usually if you use a pump like this, like on your bike, it takes quite a while because you don't get as much air volume that goes into the tube to fill it up. So it takes a little bit longer. My tube is now full. I can give a quick inspection of the tire to make sure that everything looks like it is back on the wheel safe. And I just bumped my mouse. There we go. And the last thing that we need to do is make sure that nut is snugged up on top. And we need to close our valve stem. So you know how earlier I was saying, when you unthread this little piece, the valve stem, to add or remove air. So this is what it sounds like when we are removing air. So whenever we connect our pump, now all we're doing is we're pushing that in, but we're forcing air into the tube. So the last step that we need to remember is to just snug up that little end of the valve stem. And then that's it. We're ready to reinstall on the bike. How does that feel?
So the little black thing, like I remember as a kid, and you had one before and you took it off, that little black thing, you don't need that? Yeah.
It's not, no, it is not important. They give it to you on every bike, but quite often people will just throw them away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's not crucial on this type of tube.
And then I'll end up with an extra nut too, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So you'll have that nut off the old tube.
Right.
It's your choice if you want to put that black cap on the new tube. I never do, but that's completely up to you. No harm, no foul there.
There you go.
Any other questions on the disassembly and reassembly of the actual tube?
I've sort of changed a couple of tires, or I've been a part of changing tires. I'm always scared that when you have the tire lever and you're like reefing on it to get it back in, because sometimes it's quite challenging. Is there a danger of like wrecking the rim of the tire?
No, you're not
No?
gonna wreck the plastic lever.
Okay.
For sure.
Cool.
I think you'd end up wrecking your lever before you wreck the wheel.
Perfect.
The only thing that you need to be, and this is a very notable point, if the only thing that you need to be really worried about is when you're using a tire lever, you guys can definitely write this down in your notes. When you're using a tire lever and you're installing it on the tire, there's a possibility of actually pinching the tube. So if you've ever heard of the term pinch flat, well, quite often what happens is if you insert the tire lever in the tube and while you're prying that bead over, you actually catch the tube on the hook itself, and you could actually put a hole in that brand new tube. So that's just, the term is pinch flat, which is what you want to be careful of. Now, that is the reason why I usually add a few PSI, or at least put enough air into the tube before I actually put it into the tire. Because if that if that tube has a bit of air in it, now it's taking shape to the tire, as opposed to if it's a flat tube, there's more chance that you're probably going to catch it with that tire lever.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
Good tip.
Important tip. Glad you brought that up. All right. So if there's no further questions, I will get back to the video.
Oh, how much PSI should you put in?
There's not, and this is a good question. There's not necessarily a specific amount. Usually when I'm doing my bike check, which you guys, I'm sure do every time you ride your bike.
Every time.
We want to. So good rule of thumb is if you grab that tire and you squeeze it with your hand, you want to feel like an orange, not an apple. So the difference in consistency between squeezing an apple is going to be way too rock hard, as opposed to an orange is going to have just like a little bit of flex to it if you squeeze the sidewall.
How many PSI do I run? Like 26 or something? 24?
You're typically like 23 in the front tire, 25 in the back tire.
Yeah.
And it totally depends on conditions, if it's summertime and dusty, or if it's a winter, or
If you're a scaredy cat.
If it's winter, you go home.
some do. All right, well, I'll just finish up with this video. We have our tire ready to go back on our bicycle. As soon as I find my video, there it is. You guys can all see that. Time to repair the tire.
You bet.
Fantastic. 2 more minutes.
Now that we've repaired our tire, we're ready to reinstall it back on the front of the bike. So we do exactly the opposite thing when we removed it. We'll remove our front axle and we can slip the tire back into the rotor assembly. We need to make sure that our rotor, our disc, goes in between the brake pads. And as long as we haven't pushed that brake, it should slide in nice and easily. We can reinstall our axle by pushing it in and using the multi-tool to thread the axle back into place. Once the axle's snug, we're ready to ride.
So that's front tire. Now we'll just do rear.
Now that we have our rear tire repaired, we're ready to put it back on the bike. So this is kind of one of the more difficult things to do because we need to remember how it came apart. And we need to be able to slide that chain around the top side of the cassette. And while we're putting this into place, we want to make sure that the brake rotor goes in between the brake pads again. After we have that into place, now we can take our axle, insert it through the wheel, and we can tighten our axle up. Depending on what type of axle we have, we might require an Allen key, we might have a quick release on it, but they're all basically doing the same thing. We have that rear axle snugged up. Now we can unlock our derailleur just by pushing it ahead, and it will automatically release if that's the type of derailleur you have. If you don't have a lock on the derailleur, that's okay. It is just going to automatically tension. Once we are done that, our bike's ready to go. You're back on the trail.
So it's really exactly the opposite steps as when you're removing the tire from the bike. So the front and the rear, very similar. Once you have that axle out or you're putting it back in, you're pretty much good to go. The only thing with that rear tire is just to make sure that you have the chain routed around the cassette or all of the gears in the correct fashion. So a good recommendation is if you're concerned about maybe not remembering how it came apart, take some pictures with your phone and then you'll remember exactly how it did come apart.
Right.
So you guys have any questions? Not. Any foggy points at all?
I'm
So
surprised. I'm surprised it's not foggy. It was good, Mr. Munden.
that's good.
Very good.
That's a lot of information there. So
I
well,
feel like I need to take my tire off and just do it.
yeah, that's like I said earlier, that's going to be your homework.
That's our homework.
I would
There we
love it if you guys actually did do a tire, at minimum, take a tire off your bike and put it back on. The next step is to try a tire changeover. It's only going to help you, and I know that you guys ride together, so it's probably going to help you guys out at some point, because it's not awesome walking 5 kilometers as opposed to riding 5 kilometers.
Right.
And usually there's somebody nice that comes along that might even help you. And I know that's maybe what Lacey really relies on sometimes.
Remember, we're going to take a picture with the phone. That's what the phone's for. Hi.
Oh,
All right. Well, if you guys don't have any questions, are you guys ready to do a little quiz?
Yes.
See if we remembered what we learned. I like it.
Does this reflect any mark that you will be receiving?
No, I don't think so. They're definitely just kind of looking at teaching style and making sure that I kept you guys engaged.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Like it.
Cool.
So I'll just do a screen share of what you guys are going to be receiving from me. So we're just going to kind of do a one-on-one classic game of Kahoot. So if you guys either log in on your phone or on a computer, if you go to www.kahoot.it, then it's going to bring you to join game.
And that's the code we put in?
That is the code that you put in. So
Okay.
I'm going to see your names pop up on my screen because you're going to have some sort of a name that you enter. So we'll try and keep it clean.
Oh, we're doing that right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
This is live.
Oh, I don't have my
Kahoot.it.
phone.
Yeah.
Do I have to go to a different computer then? Like,
No,
just
you
have
can
my phone code?
Or you can do
You
it
can
on
do
your
it on my phone. Okay.
doing it right now.
Do you still hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, yay, look at technology. I have to close all my shopping tabs.
Okay, I think I'm in.
Yeah. I've got Mrs. Munden and I've got Obi.
And it's just me you're waiting for as
No
usual.
problem. We can wait.
This is classic Shannon.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
0978. It's not a lie.
She's just taking a second to put her last name in.
There we go. Perfect. We have all the participants. So, like I said at the beginning, this is a fairly short quiz. It's 8 questions, but it's going to give me an overall evaluation of, geez, did you guys get anything out of this? Which I'm hoping that you guys did.
I
Wonderful.
definitely did. Even if I failed the quiz, I got lots out of it.
Wonderful. I have another participant that joined in, which is my son, which is wonderful too. So, being
Hopefully he knows the answers.
basically a professional mountain biker, I hope he can answer 1 or 2 questions. All right, I will hit start and we will go.
Oh, this is exciting. It's like a game show.
It is. It's based on how quickly you answer and the correct answer.
Red.
Oh. So we're looking at
Wait, I got it.
what tools
My
are
screen's.
we
I
can't
don't see it. Is there?
Oh, Munden, read the question out loud.
What tools are required to replace a bicycle tube?
Oh. Sorry,
Yeah, what-
my time was up. I couldn't read it on my thing.
I just saw 4 colors. There wasn't like any options.
Okay, so look, can you still see your computer screen, Shannon?
Oh, there we go. I have
Might
to go
be-
back and forth.
Might be tricky being that you're on a phone.
Yes, that's my
Yeah.
problem, but I got it this time.
All right.
We're newbies. Okay, we're ready.
All right. We're ready for question number 2.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Nice.
All right, here we go. I'll read it out loud again. The first step in changing a tire is.
Call 911.
How do I? Sorry.
What are the bottom two, Ryan? Sorry, I'm just having.
Removing the tire from the bicycle is yellow and green is call a mechanic.
I do like green, but
Oh, time's up.
Oh, I'm on the podium. I have to find you again. Where'd you guys go?
Oh man.
I'll make sure I read them all out to you guys just because the phones don't always work the best. So are we ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. So true or false? After removing the tire, press the valve stem to ensure there is no air left in the tire or no air left in the tube. Blue is true, red is false. Oh, golly, this is wonderful.
Woo!
Jesse's on fire. He didn't even take the course. Next question. After removing a tire and wheel from the bicycle, what should you not do to the bike?
I have notes.
Red is
Brakes.
change gears. Blue, have a peanut butter sandwich. Yellow, adjust your seat. Green, squeeze the brakes. Nice.
Woo! Oh, I gotta beat Jesse.
Question 5. What does it mean to break the bead of the tire? Red, red herring. B, bust the tire with your incredible strength. Yellow, to separate the tire bead from locking to the rim. Oh, we had some quick answers there. I like it. Everybody got it right.
Oh.
Jesse's on fire. Jesse's moving up. True or false? Once the bead is separated from the rim, it is now time to use the tire levers to pry off the bead.
I have to get to it. Sorry, which one is true? Blue?
Blue is true. Yeah, now that we have that bead separated off that tire, now we can actually start using the tire levers to start prying that bead or prying the tire off of the wheel. Oh, Jesse.
Oh, did he leave? He went to the bathroom.
This is dumb.
So replace this with it. Oh, this did not work whatsoever. Oh, there we go.
Oh, correct answer. Hey, red.
Hey. Oh, time's up.
I'm
Son of a
going
gun.
to skip that one because that didn't work. No score changes. I'm hoping my last question worked. Yes, when installing a new tube, it is important to add a small amount of air pressure to avoid what?
That fancy word you heard.
Oh,
Yeah.
Press.
There's a pinch
I
flat.
wrote it down. Pinch flat.
Blue
Where's
is,
red?
it's not
Oh, I
Jeopardy.
have to get to the other screen. I have to get to the other screen.
Oh, very nice. Look at this.
Oh!
Come on. This is London. First place. Oh,
Thanks,
gosh.
Jesse, for leaving.
that makes me proud that all of my students podiumed.
I love it.
Well, that was good. So
That's
that's
a difficult question.
kind of a good evaluation. Well, you guys probably would have answered the first one correctly, I would presume.
Yep.
For sure.
Yeah. Small malfunction sometimes. That's okay. That's technology. So yeah, again, a little brief summary. So taking care when we are on the trail side, make it easy on yourselves. When we take the tire off the bike, we're not going to squeeze the brake levers. We're going to put the axle back into the fork or the rear triangle or the rear suspension just so we don't lay it in the dirt. We're going to ensure all of the air pressure is out of the tube when we go to use our tire levers. And Shannon, you remember those main tools that we require?
The multi-tool?
Yeah, multi-tool is one of them.
Oh, I've got notes.
What else do
Oh,
we
and the
require?
tire levers, the tube, and the multi-tool.
Yeah, tire lever.
Oh, and the bike pump.
Tube, multi-tool, absolutely have that bike pump on hand. You bet. And yeah, put a little bit of air pressure. Once you have that bead broken, you can, and I'm not just by our sheer strength, once you have that bead separated from the wheel, you can use the tire levers and pry it off the wheel on just on one side. Now we can remove the old tube, inflate the new tube slightly just to prevent that pinch flat from happening, because it's the worst, going through all of that work just to air it up and for it to go flat again on you right away. And yeah, once you have it all aired up, put back on the bike, you guys are get to hit the trails again.
Awesome.
Any questions to that at all, or did we cover it fairly well for you guys?
I think that's great.
That's great.
Really good. I would have taken the whole thing apart. I would have taken the tire.
All the spokes off, yeah, or you would have thrown it over the bank. Yeah, I'm awesome.
Walking up with one wheel.
So yeah, please, I definitely want you guys to practice that. So give it a try. I have a video that you guys can use if you want to watch it again at some point. But you guys should definitely try and get efficient at doing a couple of those things. So sweet.
Perfect.
All right. Well, I will call that the lesson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Munro.
Yes, thank